Remember that cricket is a funny game. 100 years before we protected our heads, players looked after their groin. So don't be as stupid as old cricketers. Protect your computer. NordVPN is the protection I use when facing cyber short balls or when the rights issue tried to dismiss me. NordVPN will help you get through the straight bat of any GEO blocks so you can watch all the cricket you want. If you need your pitch changed, well, NordVPN can doctor any surface to a new location so your IP address is set up for you to win. Want to buy an associate cricket shirt from a place that won't ship to your country? Select NordVPN. Want to watch a game on a free stream in another hemisphere? Give NordVPN the ball. Or if you just want to watch a clip on social media that the cricket board won't allow, promote NordVPN to pinch it. So if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects their nether region with NordVPN today.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 6 of the Overthrows podcast. I'm your host, Bahram Kazi, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, as always, is Jared Kimber, who you can find absolutely everywhere. And Jared, I think in the many uncovered and Overthrows podcasts that we've done, we've never had this tiny an itinerary. So that's good news, right?
Oh, so it'd only be 2 hours.
Yeah, hopefully this time we wrap it up quickly. And I was at the game. The Peshawar and Islamabad game, and it wasn't any use of being in the stadium because I missed that moment between Colin Munro and the ball boy. I didn't catch it live, so I'm gutted.
Do you know about the full moment though? Like, do you know
Yes.
about what happened beforehand? So I was watching it, and you were obviously doing your job, and I was kind of, I think I just had the iPad in front of me while I was exercising, and I saw a ball boy drop a catch. And then a player go over and help me with the catch. I thought, oh, that's so nice. Like, and that's all I thought of it. And then later, must have been like second last over or something. Another ball goes into the goes over the rope, and Colin Munro flies around to try and take it. And this ball boy slides in. It takes this really tough low catch, and then they just get up and they embrace in such happiness. Like, if you haven't seen the clip, hopefully the PSL don't take down my version of it, but I think Sky have put up a clip of it as well now. If you haven't seen it, it's worth going and have a look at. It's a beautiful moment. And the fact that it had come from them talking to each other earlier on as well, you just don't see many things like that. So if you're looking for a little bit of joy in your cricket, I promise you, the Colin Munro ball boy catch is for you.
Yeah, definitely very, very wholesome. And you only caught the second half of that. Junaid Khan, the Pakistan cricketer, former left-arm pacer, he has the full clip on his Twitter, so you guys can go check that out as well. And hopefully the PSL won't be taking it off. I mean, they're getting free publicity, right? Anyway.
That's another conversation for another day. You know, if you start me on that one, that's 25 minutes.
Fair enough. But this podcast, of course, is concentrated on the international cricket that's going around the globe. And we're going to start off with New Zealand versus Australia. The 2-match test series kicked off at the Basin Reserve in Wellington. And Australia literally thrashed New Zealand by 172 runs. And Cam Green scored 208 runs across 2 innings, including an unbeaten 174 in the first innings. And he was batting at number 4 as well. That too on a testing surface. It wasn't easy out there when he went to bat. And that is something, this revelation, which will please both George Bailey and Pat Cummins and even Andrew McDonald a lot, because they really wanted this to work. And here's some proof that it will work. Yeah,
it was a magnificent innings, wasn't it? I went back and kind of watched the ball by ball of it from the on the first day, and I thought that was really good innings. But I watched live on the second day. I don't know what the hell New Zealand were doing, but it's some of the stupidest captaincy I've seen in a long time. But the Cameron Green side of it, knew exactly where he wanted to hit the ball, had a clear plan. New Zealand didn't really disrupt that at all, and took the game away from them. Really, I think. I don't know what the sort of the bookmakers or the WinViz was in that morning, but they got that wicket, in the first half an hour or so. It certainly would have been in a position at that point to still be in the game, and then instead they weren't. And there was a moment when I can't remember who it was, but someone seamed the ball past him, and I thought the ball's still doing something. They're just not keeping the pressure on him, and he batted so well. Some of the stuff. Sorry, it's very hard for me to talk about this without putting the foot into New Zealand, but we can get on that in a moment. But I thought it was a brilliant innings. I think everyone thought he had this in him, but to do it at this age in testing circumstances, we saw him in England not look particularly good, right? Like he wasn't dropped by accident; he was dropped because he wasn't quite at that level. And I think KK wrote a really interesting piece over at Cricinfo this week about, Patadar and about teams now backing talent and, control percentages over individual wickets. And I'm not saying that's exactly what has happened here, but I think Australia were like, if we can get him into the side, batting in the position he feels most comfortable in, we can get a lot more out of him. And Steve Smith making that huge change really did help, Australia get onto that path. And in a low-scoring match, he was kind of the only batter who looked any good, right?
Yeah, and it wasn't just batting in testing conditions. It's also the fact that he batted with the tail for so long. I mean, there was a 100-plus run partnership between him and Josh Hazlewood at the end, because overnight, it seemed like, okay, New Zealand are in this game very much. And then all of a sudden, day two, it's pretty much gone. Australia never took their foot off the pedal thereon. And just going to give a shout out to all of our viewers who are with us in the comments. We have Jessica Bell, who won't be able to watch this episode live. That's a shame. MD Zobair, Manan, Sigmund Fraud, Arco, and Mookie. Hello to all of you guys as well. If you really want a question answered, you guys know what to do. Send us a super chat. And in other headlining news, Jared, Nathan Lyon got 4 wickets in the first innings and then 6 in the second in what was the first 10-wicket haul by a spinner at the Basin Reserve since 2006. Also, Nathan Lyon has a 5-wicket haul now in 9 different countries, which is the most for any bowler in the history of Test cricket. Had he gotten one in the UAE, he would have set the record, right, for 10 different venues or countries, nations. And to top things off, he scored 41 with the bat in the third innings as well. He's still the cricketer with most runs without a 50. So that record is still intact. And then, just the fact that this is another decorated chapter in the legend of Gary the Goat, who we just recently put Mark's podcast on as well. It just keeps getting better and better for him.
Yeah, it was funny, actually. There's a basketball podcast I listen to, Sam Vecini, if anyone out there is a big fan in the draft and everything. He's one of the best guys talking about the draft. He actually, because he lives in Melbourne now, he actually opened the podcast talking about Gary Lyon batting. So I just want, Nathan Lyon's struggle to get a 50 is now a global issue outside of the Commonwealth. But yeah, I think what it really tells us of that record is his incredible consistency. And also his adaptability to different places. It's tough because of Jadeja and Ashwin both being around at the same time. But Rangana Herath was a very special bowler. He didn't look as good in non-spinning conditions as Lyon does, right? And I think if you're picking them head to head, I still think you'd probably pick Herath over Lyon. But Lyon's ability to get wickets in places that other spinners don't is massively underrated. Now, a lot of it is just because he happened to be born in one of those places. So at a certain point, you've got to work it out. But, New Zealand is, my memory of New Zealand is the bowling averages of spinners is something like 50 or 55. Like, it's horrendous. And they don't even produce local spinners. At least Australia produces local spinners, and then everyone else struggles. In New Zealand, everyone struggles. So, again, it's just, he's going to be underappreciated. You can argue that Swan, Herath, Ashwin, all these guys were better than him, but his ability to be useful to the Australian cricket team in certain meetings, like they weren't going into this test match in New Zealand thinking that Nathan Lyon was going to take a 10-wicket haul. The only thing I would say is, just recently, Dane Peets and Nathan Lyon looking really good in New Zealand. Have New Zealand wickets changed? Probably not.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because New Zealand isn't one of those venues or nations where you expect the ball to take a lot of turn. And I don't even think Nathan Lyon would have thought that he'd end up taking a 10-wicket haul in New Zealand. But it's amazing how he's, 36, 37 now, if I'm not wrong. And he's going to back himself to maybe go for that 600. And he seems like the sort of guy who doesn't want to call it quits so soon. He seems like he's having a lot of fun representing Australia. And it's all like great news for them, the Australians, in this cycle of the World Test Championship, because all of those pieces of the puzzle are kind of connecting and everything they're trying is working. And they'd feel pretty confident to go on and defend their title.
Yeah, I mean, the Australia-India series is massive for them, right? Like, that's probably the two best teams are going to be going up against each other in a long series, and we know how the point system works and all that sort of stuff. If India can steal 2 wins out of that, where does that go? Australia lost that test to West Indies. And again, they showed weaknesses in this game, right? You don't expect your off spinner to bail you out the way that Lyon has in this game. Yeah. Maybe not bailed them out, but certainly you don't expect your off spinner to go to New Zealand to take 10 wickets. And you don't expect your number 4, who's still coming through, to bat all the way with the 100-run partnership for the 10th wicket, right? So I think if I was Australia, I'd still be like, we're not playing at our best, everyone. We're still a distance below that. New Zealand struggled with South Africa G at times. Maybe South Africa F, it might be the better term. But, so there's certainly an argument, I suppose, to be had for that Australia still isn't in full form. So there's good signs and bad signs, I think, within that. And, when you actually go through the whole, everything, it's a good win to have. But maybe it really was on the back of, Hazelwood and Lyons batting, with Cameron Green's batting added in and Lyons bowling. Probably not the full. It looks better on paper, maybe, this win than it did watching it live.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at Pat Cummins Australia, yes, they've won a lot, but I don't think of them as that dominant Australian side of yesteryear. They've been scrappy all the way through, and they've won things. So they probably, enjoy this bit that, we somehow always find a way to manufacture wins. And I'd say they'd back themselves, because this is the last cycle of this very senior, experienced crop. Yeah. They'd really want to make the most of it. Anyway, Dr. Ayush Chauhan, has finally figured out what the handle means. Yes, Def Mango is my name. Behra Aam in Urdu. A lot of people, they have their minds blown whenever they learn about this. And literally once every week, I get this. So this is not something new anymore. Mookie, why do you have no idea why I'm called that? It's my name. My parents named me that or whatever. Let's go on to New Zealand. So the next best figures for a bowler in this test came from Matt Henry. He took 5 wickets in the first innings and 3 wickets in the third. And he also scored a quick-fire 42 with the bat in New Zealand's first innings. So similar-ish game to Nathan Lyon. Would you say that in the absence of Trent Bolt, because he's obviously doing his thing, and whenever there's like an ICC event, he comes back to represent New Zealand. In his absence, would you say that Matt Henry has now established himself as New Zealand's most formidable seamer across formats?
Was it Matt Henry who had the really bad start to his career was it Test cricket?
I think so. One-day cricket? Yeah. He didn't quite crack it at Test level, but one-day cricket, he was always really, really good. He had a very impressive record. In fact, his rise in one-day cricket was uncharted, because he was breaking records and had the most number of wickets after a certain amount of games. Yeah. He did have that start. And in T20 cricket, we've seen him do well with the new ball, kind of goes for a bit in the death. And in Test cricket, now he's getting those opportunities that he never got, because, of course, New Zealand was stacked when it came to seamers. But he seems to be a regular feature now. They seem to trust him, and he's delivering.
But after 13 tests, he was averaging 51, right? And so, when was that? That was at the start of 2021, right? So that was the one thing I was asked that question quite a bit back in those days of what is going on? And I couldn't work it out, because there was no reason why he shouldn't take Test wickets. And since then, he's played 11 matches, an average of 24. So wow. A hell of a regression. Is that the opposite of a regression? But
progression?
Yeah. But look, I think you're right. I'm trying to think of his T20 numbers.
I mean, Saudi has amazing T20 numbers, but Tim Southee is a shadow of his former self at this point, right? He's not the same bowler.
Yeah, Tim Southee, you're probably, I think Matt Henry probably has a similar problem to Tim Southee. They're probably both one-dimensional T20 bowlers in some ways. But yeah, no, I think you're right. I think Henry has taken over. There was a spell he bowled against South Africa when I think South Africa were like 14 for 3 or something in must have been the first test. of that series where I was just like people are going to be going on and on at the moment about how bad South Africa are because they might get bowled out for 50 here. But the truth was, I don't think anyone in the world would have laid bat on some of the balls he was bowling. His wobble ball, because of his pace and accuracy and energy, and also I reckon his wobble ball goes further away from a right-hander than most do. I don't know what his splits are, right hand versus left hand or anything like that. But just on my eye test of when I watch him, the amount of times I think, well, that's pinged away like a left arm finger spinner. Like, how the hell is anyone supposed to play that? I think he's a phenomenal bowler, and I was always interested, as I said, in just the fact that he wasn't taking any wickets before. It'd be great to go through, CricViz or even his ball by ball record to see if there was a reason why he struggled for so long. But certainly now he's a fantastic player. And you talked about his what do you call it? His batting. He's got great chaos batting to him, right? Like he really is one of those. We had Lord Shardul make runs in the Ranji Trophy semi-final, I think it was this week. That kind of energy of like you can just come out and smash the ball. And I've seen Matt Henry do that a few times now. I really enjoy watching him bat in that kind of, in that kind of mode, I suppose is the best way of putting it. So there's a lot to like about him as a cricketer, and maybe it just took him a little bit longer than other players, right, to bring all that together. He's probably not, although it took Bolt a long time to be a really good all format bowler, didn't he? But Bolt's a much better white ball bowler now than he probably, although his one day bowling was always good, but he was probably a little bit more of a one-dimensional white ball bowler as well. So I do think Henry maybe it's taken a little bit longer to work everything out, but I think he's a fantastic player, and I really enjoy watching him bowl. He's kind of very, very consistent with what he does, and as I said before, there isn't really much that can go wrong with it. Like he's just going to land the ball more or less where he has to over and over again. And I think he's been fantastic in the way that he's played. And I find his wobble ball, if you compare him to Scott Boland, who's another very wobble balled, Scott Boland is a little bit slower, and you can probably get out of your crease too. And I found with Matt Henry, people have probably struggled a little bit just to change the length on him.
Yeah, it's interesting. People used to compare his action to Shane Bond. Of course, he did come up as one of those young bowlers who everyone thought will go a long way. I actually had the opportunity to speak to him. For those of you who want to check it out, I interviewed him for Grassroots Cricket. He mentioned how he had like a career-threatening injury. He has like a plate in his back or something like that. So to come back from that and still bowl at that good pace, really, really good action still, a joy to watch, and very, very clinical with the new ball, gets the ball to shape around a lot. I think it's a great story. And he mentioned in that interview that his time at Kent prior to the 2019 World Cup, where he spent a summer over there, that's where he was really able to hone his skills. So it's a great story. And I really hope that he goes on to do even more special things for New Zealand.
There's a lot of bowlers who played county cricket around that 2018-2019 period when the wobble ball was everywhere, that went from being very average players to exceptional players at that time. And so we know that the wobble ball, I think Peter Siddle in 2017, 2018 learns that, brings it back to Australia. So that was a really key period at which people are starting to do that. So I'm not surprised that we have another county player, international county player who went off and learned that.
Yeah, a fantastic bloke on top, which I suppose most of those New Zealand players are. They have that bit of a reputation. Speaking of weird instances, Jared, I don't know if you remember, but a few weeks ago on Uncovered, we had a super chat that mentioned Glenn Phillips as a genuine all-rounder, and we kind of laughed it off. Well, that dude, whoever sent that super chat, will have a wry smile on his face, because in this test match, Glenn Phillips scored a 70-ball 71. And then also took 5 for 45. And he'd done well in Bangladesh in the test matches. But you'd expect him to do well over there because, the conditions suited his, brand of cricketer, spin bowling, batting all-rounder. These conditions, not so much. And he's turning out to be a bit of a freak show because you don't expect these things from Glenn Phillips, and he continues to do them.
Yeah, there's a randomness to the way he plays cricket that is sort of coming across. Although, as I said, Dane Pete, Nathan Lyon, Glenn Phillips, it seems that any off-spinner can take a 5-wicket haul in New Zealand suddenly. So I don't know what's going on with that. But look, I still don't think he's an all-rounder. I don't think he's consistent enough with the ball. I think he'll go through long periods. And when we talk about someone who's an all-rounder, what we really mean is they have the ability to be that fifth bowler consistently and put pressure on if there's an injury, or give you that, great fifth bowler option. He's probably more in that Mark Waugh situation where occasionally you can throw him the ball and he's going to do something handy. I like the way he thinks as a bowler. I love the way he thinks as a cricketer in general, if we're being honest. But look, it's great that he's had some success because, we've talked about him a lot on the here. You know how highly I rate his overall talent. And I would love to see him, be consistently successful because I think he's he's just a fun cricketer to watch. And so I was really excited that he took those wickets.
Yeah, Nathan Lyon described him as the Marais of the New Zealand dressing room. So that's interesting. I never thought of him being that kind of overly chirpy character.
He's probably more manic than Marais as well. There's, Marais is always talking and thinking. I think Glenn Phillips is talking, thinking, and acting. I think everything's happening at the same time with him.
Yeah, he's got that John Cena meme thing going on for him as well. They always put in the John Cena music whenever he comes out to bat or bowl. And Mookie has very rightly pointed out that he can keep as well. So in that regard, he is a very well-rounded cricketer. Interesting fun factoid is that at the Basin Reserve, he now has a 5-wicket haul, a 50, and has completed a stumping. So how's that for a complete set, right? Last thing I'd probably want to talk about with respect to New Zealand is that we've seen that they've kind of in the series established that Rachin Ravindra is going to be their number 4 batter. Now, he got a duck and a 59, so hot and cold sort of performance. But what I want to know is that, Kane at 3, Rachin at 4, Daryl Mitchell at 5. That on paper looks like a very sturdy middle order. And of course, Devon Conway is injured now, but they've got quality players all across the board in the batting order. What happens to New Zealand when they face Australia?
I don't know. I've kind of toyed with it before, but what were they doing on that, was it second morning when Green and Hazelwood were back? So they had the field out when Green early in the over, but then later in the over, they weren't bringing all the fielders in. All right, there were still easy singles to be found for him, and Green took them regularly. They didn't really go with bouncer Yorker strategies or wide ball strategies. They didn't seem to have one strategy that they ever were going with. And then they had Rachin Ravindra, who is another part-time spinner, bowling into the footmarks against a left-hander Josh Hazelwood. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to get too match-uppy here. The footmarks are like a day old in New Zealand. He's not about to, Ravi Jadeja one back in from the Dust Bowl here. You've got a part-time left-arm finger spinner spinning the ball into a left-hander. It just, none of it made any sense. I thought it was obscenely stupid cricket. If they'd gone that sort of, if they'd gone the England method, right? And they said to themselves, we're just going to bounce Green. We know it's short boundaries. We know he'll get a couple away, but we think if we just consistently bounce him, he'll eventually hit one straight up in the air. At least they would have bought a wicket for 60 or 70 runs, right? They didn't even try that at all. What happens to New Zealand when they play Australia is, I think it's a fascinating conversation to be had. They had that last team was probably the best team to play them in that last series, and it just doesn't work for them. And there's a line from I forget the name of the singer. I think it's Ryan Adams. There's a Ryan Adams, not Brian Adams, but Ryan Adams. Who I think has been cancelled as a singer now, but he has a line in one of his songs about inherited sadness. And I always wonder about that, about, the Red Sox or, Collingwood Football Club or, Pakistan versus India. How do you inherit that kind of record? There are just times when New Zealand should play better against Australia. And there are old guys at Australia, I promise you. Jim Maxwell, I think he's probably said this on the record, so I'm not throwing him under the bus. But he if Australia's playing New Zealand in a knockout game or a World Test Championship final, whatever it may be, he would just say, well, there's no way they can beat them. And he's not saying that for effect. He genuinely believes there is no way that they will beat them. And the funny thing is, I've talked to Mountain Crow and Jeremy Coney about this. They think Australian cricket's quite dumb, New Zealanders. They actually think that it's reductive and that they don't really try anything and they just sit back and wait. Whereas in New Zealand, they're like, we're going to do this and we're going to do that and we're going to try this. And yet when New Zealand play Australia, it just feels like it all falls apart every time. It's a remarkably shit record.
Yeah, every single time pretty much. And Gary Stead actually said that they failed to read the surface, and that's alarming because this is their home series. They shouldn't be failing to read the surface, right? They should know the conditions better. And you mentioned how they should have gone for a bouncer barrage versus Cam Green. Well, they got rid of the guy who does that, and they played Scott Kugelheinen ahead of him. But anyway, we'll come to that. There's a segment on that in Uncovered, so we'll speak about Wagner and Kugelheinen. And I think that wraps up Australia versus New Zealand. And we have one more test match to look forward to. And on that note, we shall take a short break. You guys are watching Overthrows with Behram and Jared. Stay tuned. We'll be back after this ad.
Thanks to the kind folks at FlexiSpot for looking after my office and my butt by sending me their E7 Pro desk that save your favorite desk heights at a touch of a button. You don't have to crank anything. This thing just finds the height that you like and you can work. And their BS12 Pro chair that supports my posterior while I'm recording, this ad and all my shows. If you need great desks, especially ones that change heights or the best quality chairs, head on over to FlexiSpot today.
Welcome back to Overthrows, everybody. You with Behram and Jared. And after 6 years of playing their first test match, Jared, Ireland have finally won one on their 8th attempt, and that too by 6 wickets versus Afghanistan in Abu Dhabi. So away from home, happy for them about that. Just how big is this? Because this is a nation that has, done as much as it possibly can to stay relevant and improve with respect to their cricket and everything. And they don't nearly get as much opportunity to showcase their talent as much as they should. So this is huge.
Yeah, I don't think any team's made chasing 111. And getting their 4 wickets out more nervy than what Ireland did. Yeah. Like they played like a team who has been waiting for this opportunity for 200 years and were terrified they were going to ruin it. No, look, it's massive. It's cricket in Ireland. I'll give you a brief history lesson for those who don't know. Cricket in Ireland's been there since the 1700s. We know that for a fact. And there's really the Ulster Cricket Club in the 1800s, and it's certainly in Republic of Ireland, we can trace cricket back a long, long way. But around 1900, or I think it was 1900 exactly, the GAA, which is the local Irish sports, so hurling and Gaelic football and those kinds of sports, they basically said, you either play our sports or you don't play, or you go and play other sports. You can't play both, right? And it was a huge moment for cricket, really, because if you go back, there's no reason why Ireland wouldn't have gone on to be a test-playing nation. Who knows what would have happened with the Commonwealth stuff and all that sort of stuff. But on a very basic level, it really set cricket back in Ireland a long way. It meant the best athletes went into the Irish sports rather than playing in the other sports. And yet, in 1969, they have this remarkable game where they roll the West Indies out for 25 on a green pitch with a couple of hungover West Indians who were, are shocked. And throughout the 70s and 80s, depending on who you talk to, Scotland was better, right? And Scotland is always been considered to be a very decent cricket team. And obviously, Scotland has produced test players for England, going back to Douglas Jardine and Ian Peebles, like proper test cricketers. And that hasn't always been the case with Ireland up until very recently. And then in the 90s, things just changed, right? Like my cricket club in 1996 had Ed Joyce come over. And the reason Ed Joyce came over is one of our players went over to play professionally in Ireland because there was money on offer. And so many guys that I grew up with went over and played a season in Ireland. And you go and have a look and it's, and then that's where the Trent Johnstons and all those sorts of guys come through. And they start playing over there and they professionalize Irish cricket. There's a bit of money in the Irish economy because of the Celtic Tiger and all these different things. But the truth is that Irish cricket has been held up by the Joyce family and, the O'Brien family and the Lewis family, and you're talking, when I mean held up, I mean men's and women's, right? The Joyces play in both, and the Lewis family is, got members from the male and the female sides. It's incredible. And it was hard to play cricket. I think it was Ed Joyce who described that if you were seen with a cricket bag, it was Ed Joyce or Owen Morgan. One of them talked about the fact that you were abused. And there's a term in Ireland called West Brit, which is basically their way of saying you're not really Irish, you're English. And cricketers were referred to this a lot of that time. And so, for those families to keep it going, and, I've been lucky enough to, hang out a little bit at, at some of the games. I was at their first test match. It's just a joyous family cricket thing. And just on a professional level as well. They disbanded the old union-led cricket league and went independent before, I think, Cricket Australia and Cricket New Zealand did, if I remember correctly, or certainly around that period. And they went from not a test nation to a test nation within 10 years when none of us even knew who they were. I remember when I talking to Warren Dutram, who's their long-term CEO, and he was telling me that when they first had offices, the next to them in the same office section was I think it was kite surfing or windsurfing as a sport, and they had more staff members looking after windsurfing than they did on cricket at that point. It was basically a CEO and an admin. I think the woman who worked for them was like 3 days a week or something, and that was the professional structure of Irish cricket at that point. So to get from there to where they are now, and I've dealt with a lot of cricket boards. I've never dealt with a cricket board more open, more honest, more willing to help. Like, I've worked for Cricket Scotland. It's still tough for me to get Scottish players to agree to do interviews, right? Ireland, we were in 2012. Warren Dutram sat down with me for an hour. Trent Johnson sat down with me for half an hour. And then we got Niall O'Brien to wrestle with our Hansi the Cronje Bear mascot for the old Two Chucks show. They've always thought about these things really, really differently. And it's a testament to everyone from all those amateurs for all those years to the professionals that have moved Irish cricket forward. And they had to work for this, right? I mean, they basically don't play test matches. How on earth are you supposed to get good at playing test matches when you don't play test matches? I don't know. And this was not an easy win for them. It wasn't a full-strength Afghanistan side, let's be honest, but it's a good Afghanistan side. We all know that. We've seen enough of them to know how good they were. And, when they were... was it then they lost their third or their fourth wicket? You could see how
39 for 4, chasing 111.
Yeah. And they were shitting themselves. Let's be honest. Absolutely shitting themselves, right, from that point forward. And I'm sure I'll get Andy Balbirnie. I usually get him on when something's wrong. So this time I'll get it on when something's right. I'm sure he'll come on the podcast. And, I'd love for him to talk through the whole thing with us. But just just a beautiful moment, I think, for cricket in general. To have that. And also, there's so many great things about Irish cricket, like the fact that their women's team played Test cricket, 18 years before their men's team did. And, now they've got, winners in men's and women's cricket. And it really is, it's a beautiful thing.
I think what truly kick-started, the Irish cricket revolution was probably that win versus Pakistan at Sabina Park, 2007, because, so many of those players from that team went on to represent England. Right? Ed Joyce was actually playing for England at that point, but he came back to Ireland. And then Boyd Rankin played a test match for England, or maybe a couple. And Eoin Morgan went on to captain them to a World Cup. So
the interesting thing is that I think you're right. And obviously that changes things a lot. But if you go back, they just started to professionalize before then. And they were probably one of the first like Netherlands, probably better than them for a long time. As I said, Scotland were better than them. Afghanistan were coming through like a freight train, right? Kenya had already been really, really good. None of those other teams had worked out professionalism. And for whatever reason, Ireland did. Around that point, and they realized that something had to change, and maybe it was beating Pakistan that allowed them to dream that. But either way, like I remember dealing with Scotland in 2015 World Cup, and you can imagine Scotland and Ireland. There's a pretty big rivalry there, and I kept saying, why are you guys just not doing what Ireland did? And they were so upset that A, I kept pointing that out, but also B, that they weren't doing it. And it sounds silly now, but the difference. I would say that the quality of cricket in Scotland is probably still slightly higher than the quality of cricket in Ireland. And yet, look at where Ireland have now won a test themselves, and Scotland are still not, don't have test status. It really shows you all the little things they got right. And as you said, that magical win against Pakistan really helped things. But let's not forget the Kevin O'Brien win, and then the 2015 World Cup when they were just, when they played brilliant cricket in that 2015 World Cup, right? And we get frustrated when they've gone down and the golden generation's disappeared. And I covered that test in 2018, and let's be honest, there was a few guys holding on just so they could play in that first test match.
Yeah.
No names. Ed, Gary, you can hear me, but but they deserved it. Those guys, right? Like, just to go back to the Ed Joy story. So he comes out to play in my club. We didn't know Ireland played cricket, right? How many people in the 90s knew that Ireland had a history of cricket and were any good at it? And to go from that to being a test playing nation who's won a test in Abu Dhabi, in conditions that are, let's be honest, not Irish, I think is a magnificent effort.
Yeah, I remember back in that World Cup, there was this story that a lot of those guys, or at least some of those guys in that squad, had to take more time off from work because, they had qualified for the next round. And you forgot the West Indies win in the T20 World Cup as well. I believe they knocked them out in one of those T20 World Cups. So they've had their moments versus Pakistan, versus England, versus the West Indies. And they continue to, chart new heights. And this is a big one. You caught a bit of that final day's play, or well, whatever it was, day 4. And when they were 39 for 4, chasing 111, and of course, Captain Andy Balbirnie, who led them to the end, scored an unbeaten 58, and Lachlan Tucker, who scored runs in both innings. How good were they to kind of weather that storm and take Ireland through that passage of play? Because Afghanistan spin bowlers, whoever they play, they're always tough.
I think it was the quicks who had them in more trouble. Weirdly enough, they had the two quicks, and the ball was nipping around a little bit. Some good wobble ball bowling. At pace, keeping that off stump, middle stump in play quite a bit. That sort of Asian Pakistani seam bowling or Indian seam bowling style. That was. I think when the quick bowlers got tired is actually when Ireland got slightly back on top. They were not unlucky, but the left arm finger spinner, whose name I've forgotten, from Afghanistan.
Ziaur Rahman.
Yes. He ragged a couple, but the one he got Sterling on kind of was off the face of the bat. Like it was more of a mistake from Sterling. And outside of that, I thought it was the seamers who had them in trouble. And then there was a couple of half shouts. Some things could have gone against Ireland that would have put the pressure back on them. And they still had Anthony McBride, the pinch blocker, to come in. So they had a little bit of batting left to go. And Mark Adair can obviously slog them. And, they weren't going to fold up. But one more wicket, I think, really, really would have been interesting in that game. But once they got in against the spinners and they kind of... Balbirnie sort of accepted he was just going to play and miss at some of those because the ball was spinning, and Lachlan Tucker, as he does, just decided to sweep every single ball that he faced. They put a little bit of pressure back, and then Afghanistan had to bring Zahir Khan on, the left arm wrist spinner, not the former Indian player, and that was always a chance that the game was going to go very quickly in one direction or the other, because Zahir Khan is not the most accurate bowler, and it also kept bowling no balls, which didn't particularly help. But it really wasn't until they were about 30 runs from the total that I thought Ireland looked settled. Up until that point, I still thought if they'd lost a wicket, it could have been a bit of a battle on the way, all the way through. But they're not the first team to kind of crawl their way to victory in a test match, because it's not a natural thing. These guys don't play a lot of it, and this meant a lot to all those players involved. I interviewed Andy Balbirnie during lockdown. And I called him the Ireland Test captain, which he was. And he was like, well, I haven't actually captained a test yet. And, it's a completely different world, what they play compared to everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, 8 test matches in roughly 6 years, and then these tours in which there's just a solitary test match. I just don't get it. Like, how
most of the test matches have been in the last 12 months too, haven't they? Have they had 4 or 5 in the last? I mean, they played Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Afghanistan. Am I missing another one in there as well?
They've only ever played a test series in which there were 2 test matches. Otherwise, it's always been those solitary test matches, and that was against Sri Lanka. So that's what really pisses me off personally, because there's no point of inducting new members as test nations if you're not going to give them test cricket, because, how can they accumulate enough caps to build that experience? How can they know more about each other as a unit, how to win test matches if they're not going to play enough? I'm pretty upset that, teams like New Zealand and Pakistan and the likes get to play 6 to 7 test matches a year. These guys are, solitary test match series. That's just not on. I mean, they've got to fix this.
I mean, they had their chance. They should have had a 2-division system where, top 7 teams played and the next 7 teams played. They didn't even have to call the other games test matches. They could have had, Netherlands or Namibia or Scotland or whoever playing as in that second division to try and get test status.
Yeah.
And instead, we're in a situation where we call these teams test nations and they don't play all that much. And, it's very, very unfortunate, but it was great that it was an exciting game right down to the end. Afghanistan had plenty of chances to win that game as well. It was a really entertaining, messy test. It was on YouTube as well, which meant that you could watch it from anywhere in the world. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I love these low scorers because, when I looked at the scorecard, there were like 4 guys in 4 innings who crossed 50, and the highest score was Balburney's 58. And I love that. Those are the real nail biters. You mentioned how, the seam bowlers were doing things. That does kind of make sense because the player of the match was right-arm seamer Mark Adair. He took 5 wickets in the first innings and then 3 in the third. And he was the one who ultimately inspired his nation to a maiden test win. What do you have to say about him?
I wonder where Mark Adair would be if he played probably, I don't want to say more county cricket, but more county cricket or more international cricket of a higher level. I feel like I think Mark Adair's best ball is absolutely top level international quality ball, but he doesn't bowl it enough and he does struggle. Mark Adair can move the ball both ways in the air, right? And he can also get it to nip around a little bit off the wobble as well. There aren't that many bowlers in the world who can do that at 85, 88 miles an hour, right? Like he has a lot of skills going for him, but then there are other days when he just seems to bowl every second ball down the leg side. He hasn't been able to match that. And I don't know if that's development of the Irish system. I don't know if that's how he would have been in any system, but he's got, his best ball is definitely international quality. I think this is a really important step for him. Perhaps he spent so much of his time bowling in Ireland and England. What he probably might have needed was bowling more in T20 cricket on flat wickets and maybe bowling more in places like Asia where you have to just be more accurate or smarter or whatever it is that he needs. But I think his talent level is really, really high, and he certainly played a huge part in this victory.
Yeah, he had 10 wickets in 4 test matches prior. Now he has 18 in 5. So that 8-fer not only has got Ireland their maiden test win, but also propelled his numbers by a certain degree.
And I promise you, I've seen him play in some of those other test matches as well. He's played on slightly better, more conducive wickets to what he does than this one.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Okay, just to wrap this up, of course, you mentioned him earlier. One of the big positives for Afghanistan in this test match was left-arm orthodox spinner Ziaur Rahman. He took 6 wickets in total, including 5 for 64 in his first dig. And I was checking his first-class numbers. He actually has 165 wickets in 30 games at less than 20 apiece. And his List A and T20 records also hold up. But of course, there's lots of competition in those limited overs teams in Afghanistan when it comes to spin bowling. But in the longest format, this guy could be an asset. He's only 26 right now.
I mean, Afghanistan is 26. Look, he spins it a long way. He's got a bit of an interesting action. He doesn't have much of a front arm. Sort of comes around a little bit more, so puts a lot of side spin on the ball. I was impressed with him. I saw him bowl a little bit in the first innings. Obviously saw him bowl almost all of his overs in the second innings. I thought he was very good. I thought he got his length slightly wrong on a slower pitch, and he needed to, later in that game, toss it up a little bit more. And I felt he was a little bit one-dimensional as a bowler. But that one dimension is landing the ball pretty much where he wants it every ball and ragging it sideways. Like, it's a good dimension to have. But he did look, he looked a little bit one-dimensional, but I could see why he would absolutely tear up first-class cricket. Because you could see Andy Balburney having to work his way through against a bowler like that. And as I said, Lorcan Tucker kind of put him off with the sweeps a little bit more. But I thought he bowled really, really well. There's something there. Be interesting to see how he goes outside of Asia. He looks like, to me, a very Asian spinner. I'm not sure how much it will translate outside, but he does put proper revs on the ball, so that's always a good start.
Yeah, we'll see how he fares and how many test matches he ends up playing in total, because
that's also true.
Yeah, there's that. But anyway, that wraps up overthrows. In just under 45 minutes. That's a new record, Jared. And thank you to everyone who joined us in the comments section. And if you enjoyed this podcast, like this video and subscribe to both this channel and Jared's other channel. We'll be back with another episode of the Overthrows podcast next week. That's all for now. Goodbye. And for those of you who are with us on YouTube, you can go nowhere because we'll be taking a short break and we'll be coming back with the 74th episode of the Uncovered podcast. So yeah, you're with Behram and Jared still. Stay tuned. We'll be back after this short ad.
If you watch this channel, you'll love us on Main, where we do deep dives into the greatest cricket stories every week at Good Areas. How did Virat Kohli play that shot? What is so weird about Neil Wagner? And explaining the incredible misery of being a New Zealand opening batter. Visit our Good Areas site today. Want to show the world that you not only love cricket, but that you know the game deeply? Well, you need a Bodyline t-shirt. In fact, at Bodyline t-shirts, you can actually buy a t-shirt about Bodyline, but also tees inspired by the greatest players in our game. Head to Bodyline t-shirts today.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 74 of the Uncovered podcast. I'm your host, Behram Kazi, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, as always, is Jared Kimber, who you can find absolutely everywhere. Lots of off-field stuff happened this week in cricket, and we'll start with the retirement of Neil Wagner. He was staring up in the press conference, and why wouldn't he? He's been that sort of cricketer who's, put his heart on his sleeve and literally put his body on the line on so many occasions, bowling with broken fingers and broken toes. And, his record is quite impressive as well. 64 test matches and 260 wickets at an average of 27 and a half. And, he sort of made a reputation for himself for bouncing out batters and just going for bumper after bumper after bumper. Jared, what a cricketer.
Yeah, look, he's not going to be remembered as one of the great cricketers of all time, but he might have had a far bigger impact on than many cricketers who are much better than him, right? And, quite simply, he found a new method that fast bowlers hadn't really had available to them before. It's not that, obviously, the West Indies bowled a lot of short balls, and short balls are more common, but he basically... he took what was either length outside off stump or back of a length outside off stump or, length on the stumps. Those are the three different ways that fast bowlers got wickets outside of, Wagner and Wasim with the reverse swing. And it was very, very different to everyone else. And he comes in and he's like, no, I'm going to bowl just between your, bottom of your rib cage and your, underside of your chin. And I'm going to do it for hours on end. And I'm going to set the most ridiculous fields possible. And as you said, it was a combination. I remember, myself and Sid Monga got obsessed by him really, really early on. And I wrote a tweet thread about him when people were shocked. And I remember all the comments going, why are you talking about this shit cricketer? And I was just like, guys, you don't understand. This guy's changing everything. And, we had a test match last year in the Ashes with the most bounces ever bowled. Right? That's because of Neil Wagner, right? Both teams were using Neil Wagner fields. One of them was coached by Neil Wagner's former captain. It really changed things so much. And what I love about Neil Wagner was, the constant, when he first went to New Zealand, he was trying to be a fast bowler and, and the New Zealanders, and he would yell at people. He was kind of a bit like Andre Nell, right? Who I think was at his original first class team. And they kind of laughed at him in New Zealand. So he kind of changes who he is at that stage and becomes a different kind of character. And then you get the first bit of him being a test cricketer, trying to hit the top of off and it doesn't work consistently. Then he becomes this bouncer bowler. Then he slows down too much and he starts to swing the ball. Just his ability to he was just desperate to play the cricket at the highest level, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know how many people know this. He was offered two Kolpak deals. Right, he had a bowling average of like 20 in South Africa and couldn't get into his first class team because they had Andre Nell, Dale Steyn, and the Morkels, I think. I think that was his team. Couldn't get into his first class team. And got offered two Kolpak deals and went, no, my dream is not to play Kolpak cricket in counter cricket. My dream is to play test cricket. So he went to New Zealand on what I can only assume would be a lot less money. And worked his way up over there. It's a fantastic story, really, of perseverance, of hard work. And, I know there are some people who were bored by the 12 over spells of bounces and everything else. But I don't know, I've seen other South African bowlers bowl a foot and a half outside off stump for an hour and a half straight as seam bowlers, or I saw Paul Harris bowl. Like, there's something within South Africans that when they find a method that works, they are just going to spam the hell out of it. And Neil Wagner found something that we'd never seen before. I think he's really opened up something really new and interesting for fast bowlers going ahead, of that other option of just like, if you're fit enough and you're willing to take the odd boundary, you can manufacture wickets with an older ball. And I think that's great. It's not as sexy as reverse swing. Don't get me wrong. We'd still rather watch Wagner and Wasim doing their work. But it's a brilliant career from someone who probably could have been out of the game at 23 or 24, if things had gone a different way.
Yeah, proper workhorse and very, very resilient, as you've mentioned before as well. And I mean, he dreamt of playing Test cricket. He ended up with 260 wickets. And more importantly, he added a new dimension to the sport, right? We speak of Bazball changing things. Well, Wagner did something similar. He added new flavor into Test cricket. And he made Steve Smith look like an absolute amateur. Let's not forget that. There's always going to be that spell. Interestingly enough, his retirement has apparently come as a result of New Zealand cricket informing him that he is or was not in their plans for the Australia tests. And that does come as a bit of a surprise to me personally, because they chose Scott Kuggeleijn as his replacement. So now all of a sudden, how everyone, whoever's watching Australia play a test match, want Australia to lose. Maybe for the first time ever, everyone wanted Australia to win and New Zealand to lose. No one ever hates on New Zealand. Everyone loves it when they win. So this is a bit tone deaf as well. And I just don't get it, because Wagner makes more sense than Kuggeleijn.
Oh, I'm obviously the other side of Kuggeleijn and, the trial and all those sorts of things are one side of it. I think that Kuggeleijn's probably a yard quicker than Wagner at the moment. And I think there was one good spell, or maybe one good innings that he played against England. I thought he might retire at the end of that. I thought that's when he might disappear into the sunset. But that's not Neil Wagner way, right? I think he tried to squeeze out as many test wickets as possible, as you said before. I'm not saying, I probably wouldn't have picked Kuggeleijn just because I wouldn't have picked Kuggeleijn. I also don't think Kuggeleijn's a particularly good test bowler in any way. But I can see why they thought Wagner maybe was on the way out. And I can understand that side of it. And I think also, with all due respect to Wagner, and I do mean this with all due respect to Wagner, he's a player that you had to not pick, because he would have just kept... But do you know what I mean? Like,
he would have been 45 and he would have still been bowling those bounces. He would have misbarred his way to 400 wickets.
The man, he's a zombie, right? You have to behead him at a certain point to stop him. So I think not picking him was probably what they had to do, because they were kind of in a position where he just wasn't as efficient as he had been in a very long time.
Yeah, we wished him all the best in retirement, and thanks for the entertainment. Thanks for Wagner Ball, Neil Wagner. And I suppose let's take a short break now. We'll be coming back on Uncovered and talking about Indian Central contracts. You're with Behram and Jared on Uncovered. Go nowhere. We're back after this short ad.
Occasionally, I also talk about behind-the-scenes stuff. Huge thanks to everyone who has supported us on Patreon and helped us build this channel. Join our Patreon community and unlock exclusive benefits. Enjoy AMAs, live calls with me, and connect with fellow cricket enthusiasts on Discord. Express your cricket fandom with Bodyline t-shirts. Discover their extensive range of player-inspired tees, featuring cricket legends such as Murali, Warne, and Wasim. With team-themed designs and options for hardcore cricket nerds, they've got you covered no matter what your interest in cricket is.
Hello and welcome everybody back to Uncovered episode 74. You with Behram and Jared. And the BCCI recently released the renewed central contract list, and we'll talk about the notable absentees. Jared, Ishan Kishan left out. Shreyas Iyer, weirdly enough, left out, did not bag a central contract this time. And our colleague Shayan shared a piece, I think it was a Cricinfo piece actually, which clearly stated that the BCCI weren't particularly happy with how Iyer, at least in particular, kind of gave more preference to IPL cricket over the Ranji Trophy, and he could have gone and played a game in the Ranji Trophy but didn't. And he was just part of the World Cup team. He was part of this test series. He's been dropped from the squad, and now he's lost his central contract as well. Ishan Kishan, on the other hand, took some time off, maybe some mental health issues over there. He's been completely, sidelined. I don't understand it.
Yeah, the Shreyas Iyer one doesn't make any sense. If you're an automatic player in the World Cup squad, how do you go from there to not having a contract, even if you don't play in a Ranji Trophy match? And I don't really understand the backstory there. Ishan Kishan, again, is a player that probably should have a contract. I wonder just with him if there's 83 other wicketkeepers now.
But how many of them have a double 100 in ODI cricket?
No, I'm not saying that. But what I mean is, Karen Nair had a triple 100 in Test cricket, right? Do you know what I mean? That sometimes these things happen.
The greatest Test wonder, Karan Nair.
I think Rishabh Pant is being downgraded is something that people have slept on a little bit. Like Cheyenne, when we were chatting about it in our group, was like, yeah, but he's been injured. I'm like, yeah, he's been injured. That doesn't mean he's any less talented than he was. It means that he was not available to play a game. He's obviously an A tier level or A plus level, S tier, whatever they're. Is that A plus? Is that their level?
If
he's an all format player.
Cricketer. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when Pakistan released their central contracts, I was really surprised to see Naseem Shah in a lower category. And I was like, really? A fast bowler playing all three formats, someone who's absolutely critical to your 11s, is not in your highest category of contracts? Similar story with Rishabh Pant. Hey, you were injured. We paid for all of your medical expenses. So now we're going to give you less money just because we think that, you haven't played for a while, so you'll be demoted. That doesn't make any sense.
I think you and I both know that, as people who follow American sporting leagues, could you imagine how this would go down? If, I don't know, I'm trying to think of some, Joel Embiid, he might miss the rest of this season, which might mean that Philadelphia don't make the finals. Imagine the idea of the 76ers coming back to him next year when he's due, whenever he's due to re-up his contract and go, well, you did miss that time, so we're actually now not going to pay you as much. This is a thing that only cricket boards would ever think of. That's not how these things work. He's still in the best in the best amount of players. So it feels like with Rishabh Pant that he's being penalised for the fact he was injured and in a car accident, for fuck's sake, right? And then with Shreyas Iyer, it feels like he's being penalised. Was that mentioned to him beforehand? If you miss this Ranji game, you might lose your contract? Because I think if he was told beforehand, he probably wouldn't have missed that game, right? I could be wrong. But was he told that? I don't know. It just feels a little bit vindictive. As you said, I still think Ishan Kishan should be contracted as well. The more I see of the way that And Cricket Australia is probably the pioneer of these central contracts. And some years you would just look at it. I remember there was one year, and I wrote about this a long time ago, when I'm pretty sure Sean Tate was offered an IPL contract. Cricket Australia went to him and said, we don't want you to play in the IPL. And Sean Tate went, fair enough. You're my main employer. If you say this contract's not a huge contract. I think I'm getting this right. I could ask Tatey, but this is my memory of it. And he said, I won't play, right? And then when that contract finished, he didn't get a contract for the year after. So they told him to rest and not play in the IPL, and then they didn't re-up his Cricket Australia contract. And I remember writing about it at the time going, what the hell? You've just stopped this man from earning, and then you haven't offered him a contract anyway. It's so bizarre the way that some of these contracts play out. And I would love to know the full metrics of how they do things. I do think it does feel, the Shreyas Iyer one certainly feels a little bit vindictive, right? Ishan Kishan, did he miss the Ranji game as well? Or I don't think he did.
There was something of the sort, because the article did mention both of them. But Ishan Kishan, one day he was almost going to play the World Test Championship final, and you were thinking of him as a keeper in Test cricket. And now you've just gotten rid of him altogether. Sure, you've got lots of talent.
Did he play in the World Cup as well?
He played a few games, didn't he? When Shubman Gill was injured early on.
So this is where I get frustrated with the contracts, right? Because they don't make any sense. If you've played cricket within the last 12 months, especially key important games, we're not talking about we're talking about Sanju Samson, right? Who comes in for a couple of games every now and again, and plays when their second sort of string lineup is out there, or or whatever. If you're playing in the main team, or as you said, within a chance of playing within the main team, how do you go from there to not being contracted, right? And so that means that the contracts are not being meted out with integrity and correctly. And I'll say this again. I go through these things quite a lot. Central contracts right across the board quite often don't make a lot of sense. Like, for instance, the 2-year Ollie Robertson contract, I thought was just a bizarre thing in English cricket to suddenly invest in that particular player when other players have been, have had a higher workload or have played in more multi-format cricket and everything else. Sometimes I don't really understand how these decisions are made, and there's no transparency around them, right? And we have to wait for, I think it was the Sid Monger article, wasn't it, that you were talking about before? We have to wait for the Sid Monger article, and even then, it's not the BCCI being honest about them. I just too often with contracts. I just find it's all a bit icky. It feels like, I think you and I talked about this before when it was Harris Ralph he lost his contract. I feel like cricket boards are using them as like the last punishment for everything. And like the good boys get the 2-year contracts and the bad boys don't get a contract at all. It's like, that's not how professional sport works, guys. Right? Yeah. And also, if we're in a situation where international cricket is already less important than it has ever been, is this really the card you guys want to be playing? I don't know.
I mean, it really is strange. We've also got a super chat, so you can go locate that and put it over there. But for me, like, players like Rishabh Pant, they've won new test matches abroad. They are all format cricketers for you. They're leading their IPL teams. That's a grade A contract right over there. And Shreyas Iyer and Ishan Kishan, Iyer even more so. If they're playing regularly for India, what's the deal over here? How do they go from playing for India to no contract at all? And it makes more sense, right? This Swaminathan Ramesh Sashi, his question kind of suggests the same thing, that you can't always diagnose back pain. Iyer robbed. I think what he's referring to is the time where a couple of test matches ago when we were told that, oh, is he injured? Is he dropped? No, he's dropped. Yeah. No, he's injured. That's what's happening over here. There's so much there's a lack of transparency.
Yeah, and also just in general, like that whole IR situation that we just had recently was the same thing, right? Like IR had to come out and make statements because the BCCI wasn't involved correctly the way that they should have been, and everything else. And just in general, there have been players who have been put out to play with broken bones and everything else, and misdiagnoses happen, and some players are seen as soft and other players are seen as hard because they play through injuries, and some players are seen as difficult because they ask for different kinds of treatment or, and everything else. That's what I mean. I don't think that's what the contract should be. I think there should almost be a situation where, unless you actually retire, that there should be a common sense of, well, how many games were played last year and who are the players we think are going to be playing for us in the next year. I find it very hard to think that Shreyas Iyer isn't going to be in their limited overs setup. Certainly the one-day setup. Who knows about the T20 setup going ahead? And it's like, so what? He just has to play enough ODIs to get his contract back. And what if he doesn't? What if he's back? What if he does have that back injury, or what if he gets a different injury? Right now he's not covered anymore because he can't play enough ODI games, and that's essentially. So what the boards will say privately when you ask them about this, oh, he just needs to play this amount of games and he automatically gets a contract. And I always say, yeah, but if he now gets injured, he gets nothing, right? And you have made an error or a vindictive or whatever it may be, or and so I find it very, very annoying, that sort of stuff.
No, and now imagine a world in which he's not 100% fit, but he's going to play the IPL because that's where the money's coming from now. So that's another caveat in all of this. And it's crazy how this guy was a shoo-in in the ODI 11, right? In the starting team. That's what really baffles me. Another notable absentee who you might have missed is Yuzvendra Chahal. He's out. Yeah. He doesn't have a central contract.
I know you love him, but I just think that now, Kuldeep has kind of taken the wrist spinner's position, right? And Ravi Bishnoi is probably the backup wrist spinner. And they've got I think Chahal's massively underrated by a lot of people. But the problem is he spins the ball the same way as Akshar Patel and Ravi Jadeja, and they can both bat, right? And field. So I think that's a bigger issue for him overall. But he'll probably still have another big year in the IPL, would be my guess. And I don't, the one thing I would say is a player like him, I've got no problem with him not getting a contract because I don't think he is in their immediate plans. And I don't think he was in their near recent plans. That's the sort of player you say to, look, we're not forgetting about you. There's still a chance that you will come back and play. But at the moment, we think we have these 5, 6 spinners that are in our plans. And we don't think you're there. But if you come back and, and tear up the place, there's always a spot for you. That's fine. That's how professional sport should work. He wasn't in their plans. He doesn't get a contract. Not you are in their plans, but you don't get a contract anyway.
It's interesting how after Ashwin, Jadeja, and Akshar and Kuldeep, those 4 guys, it's always a toss-up on which spinner gets a contract, right? We've seen the Rahul Chahars come and go. Ravi Bishnoi is being persisted with now. Yuzvendra Chahal, I think, has been underused by India on a lot of occasions. And then what was that mystery spinner who came directly from the IPL to play for India, got whacked in the T20 World Cup in 2021?
Varun Chakravarti.
Yeah. So it's a pretty insecure place to be if you are an up-and-coming spinner in India with all of that talent up ahead. I mean, Sai Kishore is someone who's done really, really well in first-class cricket, and he's not even near the test team, whereas he could probably make a few of the other test teams across the globe. But anyway, in other sad news, Will Pucovski, someone who I have been a big fan of, on the second delivery he faced in a Shield game, he was struck on the helmet by a Riley Meredith short ball, and he was forced to retire hurt. And that is yet another concussion for the talented Victorian. His first concussion came when he was about 15 or 16 years old. And a decade in, Jared, I've lost count how many times he's had one. It's just one concussion after the other. It seems like the ball is after his helmet. And it is all too unfortunate for someone who I believed at one point was going to be the obvious replacement for David Warner, or even was set to partner him, right, for a longer period before Khwaja came back and kind of broke cricket. But yeah, it doesn't seem like he has a big future anymore because, at some point he's got to start considering whether or not he wants to continue to play cricket.
Yeah. It's a horrible situation. We also don't want to be in a situation, as someone who followed players like Herbert Chang and even guys like Justin Langer, sometimes I do watch Justin Langer and I wonder, I wonder if the so many knocks to his head are a problem. Obviously, Chris Rogers was another player. Yeah, the West Indians and Australians probably bowled more bouncers domestically. Guys who fielded short leg. Alan Border has Parkinson's. Is it Parkinson's disease or Parkinson's syndrome? One of those. And Alan Border got hit in the head an awful lot during his career. We are now in a position where we can probably safeguard some of these players. If it wasn't in the professional era, I think Will Pucovski probably would have already retired. And so in some ways, because of the professional era, he's been dragged into playing more cricket, but he's had, so much backing and treatment. He's a player who, I remember when I think he made double 100 against Western Australia early on in his career. And, a friend of mine sent me like an extended highlights of that. And I just looked at it and this is just a test player. Like it was quite clear whether he was going to be a test star or not. He was certainly going to be someone who was going to be around the test test arena for quite some time. And, every time he's back in the news, it's not good, is it? It's almost rarely these days for runs, and he's going to have to make a decision very, very soon in his life. And he's not the only one. Like a lot of professional athletes have to make that. There are professional athletes with heart conditions and other things that they need to overcome. Knee injuries and back injuries, and there was a guy called Bert Cockley. Have you ever heard of Bert Cockley?
No.
So Bert Cockley was a 90-mile-an-hour bowler, big, huge guy, a very fast bowler. Got an IPL contract before he ever played for Australia. Just never made it. His back just wouldn't allow it, right? Duncan Spencer, there are more stories about Duncan Spencer than actual deliveries he ever bowled. Another player who that sometimes your body just doesn't allow it. I think cricket is obviously such a skill-dependent game. We forget that these guys are athletes and they have to be out there and everything has to be working the way that it should be, especially if you're facing someone bowling at 90 miles an hour in Riley Meredith's case. And, unfortunately for Will Pucovski, I don't know. I kind of hope there will be a situation, into the future where they find a way to keep him around. He'll probably be fast-tracked into coaching, or, they'll try and find another position for him. I think, Swami Nathan's just sent a super chat asking if there'll be any disability pay. I don't think he would get disability pay because it would be no different than a player who has a knee injury or anything else. So he'd get paid. If he retired, he would probably get paid out his contract. But it wouldn't be a massive contract, of course, because he's, as far as I can remember, he's just on a Shield contract at the moment. But that's why there are a lot of lucky cricketers in the world that happen to have unions behind them, right? And the Australian cricketer have a very strong union. So there will be stuff that will give him access to other things, and they will try and find him a career somewhere else. It's a little known story, but, my friend Jesse, who was a cricket writer for The Age, obviously had a stroke and couldn't go on being a cricket writer at that stage. And Cricket Australia went out of their way, and so did some of the media organisations, to bring him back in. So Cricket Australia have history with that sort of stuff, but there have been a couple of players who've sued them as well over these kinds of things. So every situation is obviously a little bit different. But I just hope that he does what is right for him. And at this stage, it looks like that's probably going to be not playing cricket, at least in the short term, right? And it's a shame, because obviously it's not just the concussion that's been his issue; it's also been the mental health, which I think he said on the Vic podcast a while back that he thought the two were related. Which is going back to that thing I was talking about before of some of those other Australian cricketers and West Indian cricketers who had mental health issues, and some who had mental health issues, some who had physical issues. Getting hit in the head a lot is not an ideal way to make your money, and unfortunately, he clearly has an issue when it comes to the concussion. So we wish him all the best. And if you get a chance to find the double hundred he made against Western Australia, one of his hundreds, you'll understand why people thought so highly of him. But as it currently stands, I think it would be very hard to see him ever come back and be an international cricketer, just because I don't know if he'll ever play enough games in a row in order to get himself into that position. But I remember Pat Cummins running on a weightless treadmill for 4 years, right? Like, people sometimes do make, miraculous comebacks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I first saw him, and I also saw some of those clips of him playing Shield cricket, I thought to myself that this guy is absolutely going to be a star for Australia. And even now, when I look at the options, like, imagine Steve Smith is opening for them, right? They didn't go to Renshaw. They didn't go to Marcus Harris. And if Pucovski was fit and firing and not getting hit in the head, he would be the obvious candidate to go and fill that slot in the national team. Yep. So that's why I find it rather tragic. And of course, we do wish him the very best.
Definitely.
No one wishes that upon any player. And I mean, I have gotten hit in the head once, not by a hard ball, by a tennis ball, and even that hurt a lot, right? So
I've been hit in the head a couple of times. Yeah, actually, I was actually only hit once really badly, and that was at top edge. I was whipping the ball off my pads and got a leading edge, and it missed the helmet and hit me under here.
Did you get cut?
No, I didn't. But it shakes you up, and I've been hit with a cricket ball out in the field a few times, in the head and everywhere else. But yeah, it's obviously. It's not easy for anyone who's ever been through it. It's not easy, but clearly when the ball hits him in the head, there's more issues. It's not just a normal impact, right? And it's a real shame.
Yeah, especially when you're hit in the head as frequently as he is. But you know what? I've seen him take the reins as a commentator at times, and maybe there's a career for him over there, if not coaching. So yeah, I really hope that they facilitate him somehow. Anyway, coming to the final topic of our Uncovered podcast of the week is Marais Erasmus has retired. Seasoned professional when it comes to umpiring, one of the big names. There's this story of him, or meme perhaps, of him going around with Taylor Swift, or whether they're friends or something. I'm not educated on this. I don't know if you are. And if anyone in the comments is, please let us know, because I'm really curious. What is this thing that links Marais Erasmus to Taylor Swift?
It's probably just a tweet that went viral, would be my guess. I can't imagine there's too much to do with the two of them. Marais Erasmus, probably one of the most respected umpires we've had in a very, very long time.
Yeah.
His ability to, go back to the Angelo Matthews timed out, and his ability just to talk to people on a field is so undervalued. I think. I don't think he won Umpire of the Year very much. I can't remember if he won it at all.
Yeah.
But
I don't think he did because Aleem Dar won a lot of them. Dharmasena has a few.
And I think he might have missed out. But I think if it's a bit like, I think if you look at him over the entirety of his career, he certainly would be thought of as a much better umpire than Dharmasena. But maybe didn't have the really accurate record in a couple of years. But his impact really was on the ability to talk to players, to bring tension out of moments. I didn't know him particularly well. We stayed in the same hotel in the 2016 World Cup. Just a lovely person, great to talk to. And a lot of people don't know, a fine cricketer himself, played professionally, as a cricketer, and didn't quite make sort of the top level, but very much a very, very good all-rounder. If you look at his record, I think he averaged about 30 with the bat and with the ball in first-class cricket over quite a long period of time. But yeah, there are just so few people in cricket that ever say bad things about Marais Erasmus, and really, if that's a legacy that you leave as an umpire, that everyone thought you were on their side. And I think the one thing, and I don't know how you teach this, Simon Torfall was obviously a brilliant technical umpire, and there's a lot of really good technical umpires, and I'm not sure if Marais Erasmus was quite on that technical level. But if they could work out how to use the empathy that Marais Erasmus had on the field, I think that would be something. I mean, he probably wants to just retire and put his feet up now. He spent a lot of years. I don't think people understand. There's ICC elite umpires. It's worse than being a player. It is literally a hotel ground flight. Because they don't do a whole series, right? So even if there's a long series, they do like half the series. So they're in Sri Lanka for 5 minutes. Now they're in Pakistan. Now they're in the West Indies. They really do live from hotel room to hotel room in a way that even the players don't. I'm always shocked that more of them don't burn out sooner. But I think in Marais' it just sort of suited his personality, and he got on with it. So nothing but respect for him as an umpire. And the brief bits I knew of him, certainly as a person.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely one of the most respected umpires, especially in, current times. We had some legendary umpires in Rudy Kurtz and Simon Taufel. Aleem Dar kind of shat the bed towards the end, but he had a pretty decent career as well.
I mean, Aleem Dar was a brilliant technical umpire for a long time, and then became one of the worst umpires. This has nothing to do with anything, but I'll tell you my funniest story was he had a really bad series in Australia. And so, the joke became that Aleem Dar couldn't umpire, and Aleem Dar up until that point had been pretty brilliant. And so I tweeted that it was a shame to see such a good umpire fall apart or whatever. This Aussie guy goes back and just says, "What are you talking about? He's the worst umpire in the world." And I went, "Well, he wasn't always. He won 5 ICC Umpiring of the Year awards in a row or something ridiculous." And this guy goes, "Oh, that's just political correctness."
Okay, then that's a new one.
Okay,
but yeah,
anyway.
It's interesting how Marais didn't get one of those awards, because 80 test matches is still quite a lot of them to officiate, and he's touched 60 as well. But yeah, all the very best to him in retirement. We've got a super chat, and we'll take this one before we end this episode. Anish says, Sunrisers Hyderabad made Pat Cummins their captain. Any thoughts? They never learn. We actually spoke about this very recently in one of our podcasts, where we were looking at all of the options that Sunrisers have amongst their overseas picks, and neither of us picked Pat Cummins in our 4. So
what does that tell you? I mean, I think it was when Owen Morgan was captaining and was struggling a couple of years ago. I wrote a big piece. I'd made a video, but I can't remember if I did it from my side or for Cricinfo, but of just how stupid it is to pick an overseas player that you're not 100% sure is going to play in every single game, right?
Yeah, and he is the second most expensive pick of all time in the IPL. Let's not forget that.
I would love to talk to Pat Cummins to see if he rates himself higher or lower than the Sunrisers Hyderabad owners do. I mean, he was thrown out of the IPL is probably the wrong way. He would have got picked up, but he would have got lesser contracts. It just feels to me that I don't think he's particularly great T20 bowler. I think it's his weakest format. That's fine. He's pretty good at the other formats. He's not a particularly great bowler in white ball cricket in Asia. He's not done well in the IPL before. He's not a brilliant tactician. I think I know he did really well in that World Cup final, and then, so suddenly everyone's like, "Oh wow, yeah." What about all the games leading up to that, right? Like, anyway, I won't even get into that. But the problem with the overseas captain is, and this is not just an IPL thing, but I think it's even more stark in the IPL than anywhere else, is that if you were picking your best 4 overseas players, you really want flexibility and the ability to mix and match at any stage. If you have a captain who is not automatically in those two best overseas slots, everything just goes to hell. You can't rest him for a game, right? If you don't want to use, if you've got a pitch where you want to use extra spinners, if he loses form, it's a shit show. If he doesn't lose form, but he's just kind of average all the way through, that's even more horrendous because you can't quite drop him. The overseas captain thing, I don't understand. And also, Aiden Markram, I would have thought, is a better natural captain than Pat Cummins. Was an automatic selection for this side. To go away from that and to spend an absolute fortune on this, I mean, good luck to them. They're a shit show of a franchise. Like, Rashid Khan left, the whole, a David Warner situation. Now this. I don't know what's going on with their management, but I don't particularly trust it. I thought they had a really good method back in the day and were, really going towards something. And, since then it's, I don't know, all gone to shit. I don't know. I'm sure we will do a video about this during the IPL because it blows my mind. It'd be really interesting to see how it goes. It doesn't mean it won't be a success, right? But it shouldn't be a success. And if it is a success, it will validate poor decision-making in my view.
I remember my 4 picks were Heinrich Klaassen, Adrian Markram, Glenn Phillips, and Hasaranga. Pat Cummins does not play a T20 game in the IPL ahead of those guys, for me at least. And yeah, maybe those owners just have a hard-on since that World Cup final. And that was an ODI, so that's even more bizarre. Anyway, one more super chat. Ayush Chauhan. Dr. Ayush Chauhan says, thank you for keeping me up till 3 a.m. Well, I suppose you're welcome. And thank you for all the constant comments. There was this one guy in the comments who kept saying that you should have Ahmed Shehzad in place of me over here. I did not understand that one.
Ahmed Shehzad,
would you?
The cricketer.
Yeah. Would you want Ahmed Shehzad instead of me, Jared?
Do you know, I know that, yes. Just because of, no. But I do think people don't understand that Bayram is the host of this show. Most former cricketers could never host anything. Right, it's really rare to find a former cricketer who would be able to do that. Plus, and look, but we can mute out. I'll put my hand over his side of the frame here for a minute. In fact, I'm just to remove him. He's brilliant at what he does, Bayram. Right, he's a really good host. He does all the research. He does all the work. He's here on time every day. He's an incredibly talented. Why would I want a former player? Do you know how unreliable former players are? So even if Bayram was shit, which he clearly is not, that wouldn't be a situation. But no, Bayram is part of the good areas family as we go forward, and we will only use him more because he's really, really good. And if Shehzad wants to come on and do a Red Inca or wants me to co-host a podcast with him, I'll happily do that. But I think a lot of people don't really understand what your job is, and that's probably because a lot of it is behind the scenes. It's not just a pretty face and a stupid mango.
Yeah, well, I think they see me on all of these different platforms that they don't really know what I am. People are like, hey, we want a job in cricket. And I'm like, hey, I'm hustling for jobs in cricket. I'm your competition. But anyway, I'm glad you took me out for a second over there because I was crying at the back. Anyway, thanks to everyone in the comments for staying with us. And if you enjoyed this podcast, give us a like, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to both this channel and Jared's other channel on YouTube. We'll be back with another uncovered episode next week, but we've got another super chat. Why do we have another super chat? No one knows. 2024. Hi, Jared. You were saying how you would update the true metrics, chasing index, impact on opposite players, etc. How's that going?
Yeah, we're still working on that. I think we did some of these things. I don't know if we had a chasing index, did we? I can't remember what we had. But yeah, the true metrics and everything else. We're still working on all that. Our company kind of exploded throughout the World Cup. in many different ways. But the finances haven't quite matched that level, and so we hired a lot of extra people at that stage, and upgraded some of the people as well that we had on and extended our podcasting network. But the stats person is the next person we're bringing in. We're actually talking to someone at the moment who might come in, and so I'm hoping for this IPL and then the World Cup afterwards, we will have a bunch of advanced metrics. And if that's the case, we would then try and work on those from then on in, right? And have it so that things are a lot more context-based. But, me and Cheyenne have already done some on our own, of course. But we want it to be a little bit more automatic and look at that from that perspective.
Yeah, and Cheyenne has also shared this YouTube course with me on data and Python and extracting numbers. And as soon as I find some time, guys, I'm going to study that stuff and maybe I can upskill. But
do you know who can't do that? Ahmed Shahzad.
No, not a chance. Good luck talking to Ahmed Shahzad about anything for an hour and 25 minutes. But anyway, guys, I'm not doing the outro again. Thanks for watching. Thanks for staying with us. We'll be back with another episode of Uncovered next week. That's all for now. Goodbye.
Support us on Patreon and help us keep making our content. Join for exclusive perks like the AMAs, the live calls, and to chat with me directly on Discord. You can also enjoy ad-free content, early podcasts, and access to my emailer. Step up your cricket-style game with Bodyline t-shirts. Explore their exclusive player-themed t-shirts, including favourites like Virat Kohli, Kane Williamson, and Ben Stokes.